and welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly, where we discuss the latest in Israel's geopolitical developments. I'm Aaron Porras, and with me today in the studio are former Knesset member Dr. Einat Wilf, senior researcher with the Israel Institute for Security Studies, Brigadier General Dr. Meir Eliran, Dr. Dani Orbach, who is a military historian from the Department of Asian Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and finally Ambassador Yosef Livni, former Israeli ambassador to multiple countries. Now today we will be, of course, discussing the aftermath in Israel and abroad since United States President Trump officially recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He has also promised that work will immediately begin on moving the United States Embassy building out of Tel Aviv. And as expected, Israel's leadership has praised the decision as a long time coming, while Palestinian factions have denounced the decision, some even calling for days of rage that many people have delivered on.
إن هذه الإجراءات المستنكرة والمرفوضة تشكل تقويضا متعمدا لجميع الجهود المبذولة من أجل تحقيق السلام، وتمثل إعلانا بانسحاب الولايات المتحدة من ممارسة الدور الذي كانت تلعبه خلال العقود الماضية في رعاية عملية السلام. كما أن هذه الإجراءات تمثل مكافأة لإسرائيل على تنكرها للاتفاقات وتحديها للشرعية الدولية وتشجيعا لها على مواصلة سياسة الاحتلال والاستيطان والأبارتايد والتطهير العرقي.
شعبنا الفلسطيني من حقه أن يقاوم بكل أشكال المقاومة، والمقاومة الفلسطينية ستكون لها كلمتها ردا على هذه الجريمة التي أقدمت عليها الإدارة الأمريكية المشاركة والمتواطئة مع العدو الصهيوني.
إننا نطالب وندعو بل ونعمل وسنعمل على إطلاق انتفاضة في وجه الاحتلال الصهيوني. لا يوجد اليوم أنصاف حلول، ولا يوجد اليوم التحرك في المربعات الضيقة لنطلق العنان لكل أبناء شعبنا الفلسطيني ليعبروا عن الغضب وعن التمسك بحقهم الأزلي في القدس وفي فلسطين.
So there have been rockets fired in the south, return airstrikes, riots across the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem. There's even a stabbing, earlier this morning. So the idea is this the beginning of a war that many people have been worried about and worrying about for so long? Would you like to begin?
Okay, first of all, we don't know what's going to happen next. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. But if you ask me, I would suggest that the reaction so far has been quite moderate on the Arab world and in the territories, and also in Jerusalem and within Israel with the Arab society here in this country. So this by itself doesn't mean that it will not get worse and it will not deteriorate. It depends to a large extent on what we do and how careful we are in terms of the challenge. But so far I think that it's now what, like 3 or 4 days. Not too bad for a reaction.
Anyway.
Well, I believe I agree with Meir. The response was very moderate so far. In a sense, it's like a puppet theater. Everybody just said the lines that one expects to hear. Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, he called to launch an intifada. Well, a few days ago, on Tuesday, before Trump's declaration, was his opinion any different? He always wanted an intifada. He didn't recognize Israel before Trump's declaration. It's just the same. Everybody is just repeating the lines, and I don't see any response which is really meaningful.
So you think that the response thus far has essentially been dispassionate, that it's kind of like a loud minority?
We heard President Abbas' statement before. He sounded bored by his own speech. I just don't see anything which is really unusual. That may change very quickly if there is an unexpected contingency. Let's say something happens in the Temple Mount, or something happens in Al-Aqsa Mosque, or too many people are killed. Many unexpected things can happen, and if they happen, then hell may break loose. So far, we just don't see any signs for unusual escalation.
But you know, we're not seeing any sort of indication that this will give an excuse to other organizations, say Hezbollah, to like join in the action and maybe start anything. I don't know.
Hezbollah is out of the question right now. I think we have to talk about the Palestinians as a potential adversaries or a potential flare-up. Hezbollah has very good reasons to stay where it is, mostly in Syria, by the way, just to remind ourselves. And even, of course, we get into a scenario of escalation, a major escalation, then it will be time for the Hezbollah to rethink their policies. But as of now, we have to understand one very important thing. Nothing really happened in tangible terms. And we have to understand this. Trump's decision, even though important and very joyful for Israelis, or for some Israelis, maybe even for many Israelis, or for the government, is not really a game changer. Because you have to remember, since '49, Jerusalem has been the capital of the state of Israel. Now it has been recognized, very gratefully so, by the US, very, very important move, but it's not a game changer. And we have to remember that words are just words. Symbols are just symbols. Just think about it when we say about Jerusalem that Jerusalem is an undivided city. Is it an undivided city? Okay, so words count, but to an extent.
I think that as we speak, the Prime Minister is in Brussels for meetings with people in the European Union. We have to see how that meeting takes place, how it develops, and the kind of rhetoric that will come out from the European Union. If it becomes hostile, more critical than it has been thus far, it may influence speeches and declarations by the Palestinians or by the Arabs. But I agree with Meir totally. At the end of the day, the major step concerning Jerusalem was taken in 1949 when David Ben-Gurion decided to move the capital to Jerusalem. And now, and let us remember, until 1980, 81, there were about 10 or more embassies in Jerusalem. So there were nations who have supported the partition resolution, and yet they had embassies in Jerusalem.
So, okay, Dr. Wolf, I'd like to turn to you now. Just what about the embassy? What about the United States embassies who are now kind of under attack? Are we losing support, perhaps, over this move?
I think that what President Trump said was very carefully worded, and he left all options on the table. He left open the possibility of a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. He made it very clear that the borders are up for negotiations. He did not recognize Israel's annexation of the territories in the West Bank that make up the eastern part of Jerusalem. So for Arab leaders around the world, or for Muslim leaders around the world, if they're not looking for an excuse for violence, if they're not looking for an excuse to go against the United States, they're fine. They can legitimately say that the president's declaration changes nothing. It recognizes something that should have been done 68 years ago, that the western part, west of the 1967 line, is legitimately and undisputedly Israel's and is legitimately the seat of its capital, and everything east of the line is up for negotiations. So when you're seeing attacks against American embassies, it is not about because people have carefully read the declaration, analyzed it, and thought that this makes a difference. It's a symbolic move. They want to express the fact that they don't appreciate American support for Israel in any way, shape, or form, in the same way that you're seeing anti-Semitic attacks in Europe. I mean, when you have other conflicts around the world, you don't see the diaspora of those conflicts being attacked. Jews are being attacked when things happen. This is an American president making an American decision about Israel, and Jews in Europe are getting attacked. It tells you that the problem has literally nothing to do with what the president has said, but rather with deep-seated enmities that use excuses such as this in order to express themselves.
Yeah.
But people feel aggrieved when they believe that something which was theirs is no longer theirs, when the status quo is changing against them. And I think that's the feeling on the Arab side, that the status quo is crawling towards Israel.
So that's kind of my question, though, is that what actually has changed? You know, because, for example, the Palestinian Authority is saying that the United States as a peace partner in the two-state solution is done. They're pulling people out of D.C., but were they at anywhere near the negotiating table to begin with? So what has changed?
Exactly. I think that maybe we should ask ourselves the following question. Maybe they were looking for an excuse to make these kind of declarations, and they take advantage of the speech by President Trump and to ventilate all kind of sentiments. But nothing more than that.
I would like perhaps to suggest a different prism. The big question here for us is whether the declaration stands by itself or it's a prelude to some kind of a process that might come about. And in the air, we have different kinds of rumors or reports that possibly sometime soon, perhaps as early as the beginning of next month, the American administration might come up with an initiative, okay, some kind of initiative. Nobody knows, or at least I don't know anything about its context or its shape, etc., etc. But there is something in the air, okay? So we have basically two options here. The first is that the declaration stands by itself, and then I think it will be very much similar. I remember about 6 months ago it was, when I was here, I think, in this studio and interviewed about the 59 American Tomahawk missiles that all of a sudden were launched against Syria, which was at the time the first American major attack, military attack against a foreign country. And it was really mind-boggling, 59, the context, of course, at the time was the chemical warheads that the Syrians used, etc., etc. So everybody was very, very, surprised, amazed, and impacted by this thing. And I suggested at the time, let's wait and see what happens. And the fact of the matter is that nothing happened ever since. America is not a factor in Syria. Actually, it's withdrew from any kind of Syrian participation in whatever is happening there. Same thing can also happen here. On the contrary, if it is kind of a beginning for another process, it depends on the process, okay? If, and there are some speculations that that might be the case, that this was sort of a kind of appetizer for the Israeli administration to suggest to them, listen, we are very good, we're very favorable, we support you in so many ways, mostly in the symbolic ways, we support Jerusalem as your capital, etc., etc. But when it comes to the actual great deal that we are trying to design, we have some other issues that we have to discuss with you guys, perhaps even to the two-state solution, and perhaps even getting into some kind of negotiations about borders and some other issues. And then we see about Jerusalem, etc. This is a completely different story, of course. I don't know what's going to happen. I think that nobody really knows. Maybe even the American administration doesn't know what's going to happen in this respect. But if indeed it is going to lead to a significant step forward, then I think that we will have to look at it in a different angle.
I absolutely agree with Meir. I think that if this is a part of a Trump super deal in the Middle East, it makes a lot of sense. If not, it's only a dangerous move. But I doubt it, because Trump is so erratic. He hates tough work. He doesn't plan. I'm more skeptical than Mayor, maybe.
I'm also skeptical, by the way. I'm just raising it as an
No,
option.
it's something that most people have said, and people speculated whether it was a part of a plan or just an isolated declaration that came as a response to the base.
So actually, with respect to the European Union, since Trump's announcements were made, there have been several developments in Europe as well. The European Union is condemning the move as detrimental to peace efforts, while only Czech President Zeman followed the United States' suit and recognized Jerusalem too, even calling the EU cowards for not doing so. Prime Minister Netanyahu is now set to go to Europe himself, as we stated earlier, starting in Paris and Brussels, to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron, but he's coming with some very strong words of his own.
President Trump's announcement on Jerusalem has a very worrying potential impact. It is a very fragile context, and the announcement has the potential to send us backwards to even darker times than the ones we are already living in. The European Union has a clear and united position. We believe that only realistic solution to the conflict between Israel and Palestine is based on two states, and with Jerusalem as the capital of both the State of Israel and the State of Palestine.
אני מייחס חשיבות רבה מאוד לאירופה, אני מכבד את אירופה, אבל אינני מוכן לקבל מוסר כפול ממנה. ואני שומע משם קולות גינוי להכרזה ההיסטורית של הנשיא טראמפ, אבל לא שמעתי קולות גינוי לירי הרקטות נגד ישראל שבא בעקבותיה ולהסתה האיומה נגדנו. אני אינני מוכן לקבל את הצביעות הזאת, וכרגיל גם בפורום החשוב הזה אני אייצג את האמת של ישראל ללא מורא ובראש מורם.
So, Dr. Wilf, I'd like to go to you again this time. Is there a double standard still being applied even now to Israel in the EU?
Absolutely. First of all, the Europeans broadly have always misunderstood what drives the conflict. They completely don't understand that fundamentally it is about Arab rejectionism of any Jewish presence, a sovereign, equal Jewish presence in the land. Now, in order to make peace, peace is better served by making it clear that the Jewish presence in the land will never be rolled back. But the Europeans are actually pushing peace further away, but by giving the other side, letting them continue in their delusions as if they can achieve things by continuing to say no. If there is any true value to the declaration of President Trump beyond the value in terms of Jerusalem, it's the value of saying that Palestinian and Arab rejectionism actually doesn't win the day. And that when Israel broadly says yes, just as it did with partition, just as it did several times with Jerusalem, ultimately people are willing to reward Israel. And the fact that the Arab side continues to say no is not something that is going to get rewarded. So the European mindset of rewarding a certain rejectionism gets it all wrong. And in that sense, they don't get it once again. I do hope that, such as with the Czech Republic, there will be more breakaway countries that will begin to say enough, at least when it comes to Jerusalem, non-holy, dull neighborhoods. I grew up there. There's seriously nothing interesting there. Jerusalem, west of the 67 line, is legitimately Israel's capital. There was and is this nonsensical policy that President Trump finally ended of holding the status of Jerusalem west of the line hostage to the dispute over Jerusalem east of the line. Ending that policy is a good thing, and Europe would do well to finally look at what really drives the conflict and to understand that peace would be better served by telling the Palestinians and the Arab side, enough. You need to learn to say the word yes.
I think that one has to remember that the decision in 1948 to make Jerusalem an international city and the EU policy is actually based on that decision had nothing to do with the Palestinians or the Muslims. This is something of the Christian world. that wanted international, namely Christian, control on Jerusalem. It's history. It has no relevancy today. But I disagree with Einat in one point. I don't believe the EU has double standards. I think the EU is deeply conservative. Due to the European experience in the Second World War, the EU is dead afraid about any change in international borders, any change in the status quo, any change in past agreements. They just want to freeze the situation.
Even if that yeah.
What I'm saying is, if you listen to the European position, as we just saw, there's no correlation between what she said and the issue at hand. She referred to two states, to Jerusalem as the capital of the two states. Mm-hmm. Where did President Trump say anything about two states? Did he say no? Did he say anything that takes out of contention the possibility of Jerusalem becoming in the future the capital of both? No, nothing. So it is a position which is not based in the reality as we heard it from President Trump.
So if you're saying that the European Union is dead set essentially against Israeli policy, they're against it. They're actively acting
against specific issues within the Israeli policy. You have to differentiate. I think we have to understand that number one, most European countries, especially in Western Europe, also now presently in Eastern Europe, are very much in favor of Israel, very supportive of Israel, are doing business with Israel. We're doing business with them, and so basically it's fine. We have one issue that separates us, which is very, very important. This is the issue of the territories and the settlements, okay? If Israel tomorrow, because of one reason or another, changes this particular kind of policy, there's going to be no major dispute, political dispute between us and them.
But then why not recognize West Jerusalem? No settlements west of the 67 line.
Why
What's
the
the big
US?
deal?
The US, our greatest friend,
I agree, but they finally ended it.
Okay,
because
so
this goes against agreements from 1947.
It was
which
never an
the
agreement.
EU sees it as part of international law that we want to preserve.
Yeah, it was a UN resolution.
Political act? Was it not a political act for the United States to not move the embassy? Was that not a, because everybody's saying it was a political act to move it now?
1995, certainly, it was a position based on the petition.
But I refuse, and I would not like us to suggest that the Europeans are anti-Israelis or anti-Semites because they do not move their embassy to West Jerusalem. We have to be a little bit more realistic about that. I think that, with the time, perhaps, it will, and especially if the situation will be moderate and even hopefully sometime that we're going to have some kind of a progress towards some kind of arrangements. Some European countries and some countries, not only in Europe, all over the world, will start thinking how stupid this really is. But to expect them to change their position of 70 years just 3 days after the Americans did it. And let's remember, most European countries are not very fond of the American administration presently. And to follow Trump 4 days after his decision is something that it would not, I think, be reasonable to expect.
Yeah, I'd like to add just one thing that historically, until 1981, and I reiterate what I said, there were a good number of embassies, and most of them were from Catholic countries. So the Christian aspect, it depends. When it suits you, it goes against the idea of, of Jewish domination. When it doesn't suit, it's something else.
All right, well, on that note, I think it's unfortunately time to end our show. Thank you for joining us on this edition of ILTV's Israel Weekly. Thanks again to our guests, Dr. Meir Elran, Ambassador Livni, Dr. Wilf, and Dr. Orbach. And thanks again to all of you for tuning in. See you next week, and shalom from Israel.